My name is Ernestine Collins. Welcome to Writers Reading. This program is a public service presentation of WPRG Television, Harold, Kentucky. Today I'd like to thank Dr. Don and WPRG for making this show possible. I'd also like to thank our cameraman, Eugene Cisco. Hi, Eugene.
Thanks, Eugene.
And again, once more, I'd like to thank my sister-in-law, Patsy Jean Case, for giving me the idea for this show. Today, my special guest on the show is Dr. Mark F. Sohn, who is a professor at Pikeville College. Dr. Sohn, welcome to our show.
Well, thank you, Ernestine. I'm real happy to be here. I really like this idea of what you're doing. To have a television show that features authors from our area.
Thank you very much. What book are we going to talk about today, Dr. Sohn?
Well, today I'm going to talk with you about the first book that I put together since I started writing about 6 or 8 years ago. This book grew out of a course that I taught at Pikeville College. And the name of the book is Education in Appalachia's Central Highlands. And I'll hold this up. I think maybe you can see it. It's called Education in Appalachia's Central Highlands. And it's about 600 pages. It's a big book. But it contains information about schools and people related to schools from eastern Kentucky. The book grew, like I said, out of a course that I taught for 10 years called Appalachian Education. And a lot of the original research was done by students that were in my classes. And so the book features about 25 different students that wrote papers, and then I collaborated with them in the finished product.
That's very interesting. Would you like to tell us how we could get a copy of your book?
Well, sure. What's the name of our show?
Writers Reading.
Writers Reading. Okay. So if someone that's watching this show wants to get a copy of this book, they could write to Writers Reading, right? At Post Office Box 44, Honaker, Kentucky. Can you give us that zip code?
41639.
41639. This show is directed by yourself, right? And so if someone was writing to you, they could either send their work to be written or request this book there at Box 44.
Yes, and by the way, since he mentioned it, we're very interested in your writing. I forgot to mention that at the first of the show. But anything that you have that you would like either to have read on the air, or if you'd like to come and read it yourself, send it to us at that post office box, Box 44, Honaker, Kentucky 41639. Dr. Sohn, would you like to read to us today from your book?
Well, thank you. Let me start with the very first chapter, and it's actually the opening of the first chapter. The title of the chapter is Black Education, Learning, and Life, A Historical View. And again, remember that this book features education in eastern Kentucky. The year was 1955, and Pikeville College had its first black basketball player, Garrett Eugene Mullins. Pikeville College basketball was finally integrated, but the other southern teams in its conference were not. Arnold Meek remembers Garrett as a fine, quiet man, not one to try to make waves. When the team went on road trips in the South, Garrett had to stay on the bus. He had to eat and sleep on the bus. He was not allowed to play in the games. In the few places where he was allowed in the gym, he had to stay in the locker room. Garrett Eugene Mullins. Garrett Eugene Mullins was graduated from Lincoln Ridge School for Negroes in Shelbyville at a time when Pikeville College was not accepting blacks. He had to go to an all-black college in Tennessee his first years. He then transferred to Pikeville College when it started accepting blacks. 1955, Pikeville College was making great strides as far as integration was concerned, because from 1950 until Garrett entered in 1955, 3 Negroes had attended. During the early 50s, the college was not allowed to play basketball with black schools. And this goes on and on. This chapter discusses not only Garrett Eugene Mullins and basketball, but it discusses black schools in Pike County, Pikeville and Pike County. So that's a chapter. There's quotes here from different materials. The book is actually a compendium of, it's a compilation of materials. And a lot of it I wrote, but a lot of it my students wrote. It brings together a lot of information about education in eastern Kentucky.
Okay. Is there anything else from the book you'd like to read
Well,
for us
sure.
today?
Let me read about this section here is on Harry Dameron. And Harry Dameron was a teacher on Hurricane Creek. Taught in a one-room school, lived on Hurricane Creek. Harry Dameron was born in 1907. And here's the opening to this chapter. There is a special quality required of teachers. You have to love children. And Harry Dameron loved children. He loved people. This chapter is a profile of an Appalachian teacher, Harry Dameron. He dedicated his life in every way to helping others. Toy and Harry, here we go. Here's a little other section from this. Toy and Harry survived on Harry's teaching salary of $50 each month. Toy recalled, once the power company man came to cut the electricity off because we hadn't paid the bill. We always paid our bills, but Harry's check hadn't come yet. Up the pole went that man. You had to cut the power off at the pole back then. Up the pole went the man. You had to cut the power off at the pole back then, and out there I went. I asked him what he was doing, and when he told me, I went back to the house. I got me a broom handle, and tied some rags to it, and then threw some lamp oil on them and lit it. I wouldn't let him off that pole till he turned my power back on. Every time he'd come down low enough, I'd scorch his seat. How's that? He turned the power back on. So that's Harry Dameron. If you were a teacher back at that time in this country and the power company came to turn off your power, I guess that's what you did. Harry and Toy had 5 children. Paul was born in 1932, followed by Joan, Kenneth, Norma, and Glenda. And this chapter goes on and on. That's Harry Dameron, a school teacher. He taught for 30 years at the school called Little Dixie. 30 years at Little Dixie.
You have a lot of history in there, don't you?
This is basically history. It's also got some current issues in education, but it's lots of history. Let's talk a little bit about prayer. Bible instruction, testimonials, and prayer in 7 Eastern Kentucky public schools. Now remember that this book was written and completed in 1986. If you'd like to get a copy of this book, this is Education in Appalachia's Central Highlands. Just send $10 to Writers Reading. All right, the name of the show. Send $10 to Writers Reading at Post Office Box 44, Honaker, Kentucky. And Ernestine will get you a copy of the book. But anyhow, this chapter is on Bible instruction. Since the early 1960s, when the United States Supreme Court ruled that state-required school prayer was in conflict with the First Amendment, the religious issue has remained highly publicized and controversial. A number of court decisions since that time have kept the issue in the public eye. The courts have attempted to articulate the meaning of religious teaching. In parts of eastern Kentucky, religion is so interwoven into the culture, it is difficult to separate it from other facets of life. This inquiry, this chapter in other words, this inquiry summarizes what is and what is not constitutionally permissible in the public schools and relates them to the actual religious practices in 7 Eastern Kentucky public schools. This survey of religious activities in the schools of Eastern Kentucky contains material collected from informal interviews, conversations with principals, teachers, librarians, secretaries, and students, like I said, in 7 different schools. So that's a chapter, Ernestine, on Bible instruction and its historical position here in Eastern Kentucky.
Well, it looks like you've done a whole lot of research and done a thorough job.
Well, there's a lot of research. There's probably about 800 references. Each chapter has references. Each chapter has a poem at the beginning of the chapter. It's completely indexed. There's 22 different authors. There was a lot of work that went into this. One of the things that I wanted to do too today was to read a couple of poems that are in here. F.E. Waller-Smith is perhaps our most famous poet here in Eastern Kentucky, and I picked out 2 poems of F.E.'s to read you. How much time do we have left?
I'm really not
You don't
sure.
know? Well, that's good. We'll just keep right on going. Let's read a poem of Effie's. The first one, or you could read this. You want to read this poem
Okay,
of
sure.
Effie's?
Sure.
This is a poem of F.E. Waller's that I like because we live in the Cumberland Plateau, and the name of the poem, F.E. Waller-Smith, Sunset on the Cumberland.
Okay, I've never read this before, so if I mess up, bear with me. Sunset on the Cumberland. Upon the chimneys yesterday we sat beneath the trees, while sang the birds and softly blew the flower-scented breeze. You should have been with us upon those chimney rocks and seen the golden sun in grandeur sink behind the hilltops green. Like bars across the western sky, such gorgeous streaks of red, such brilliant hues of yellow, of blue, and pink were spread. So richly blended were those hues, they cast a lovely splendor, which words cannot describe upon the budding treetops tender. Had Rembrandt been with us, I doubt quite much if he on canvas could have portrayed with brush and paint that sunset's loveliness. Long sat we on those moss-grown rocks, with eyes and minds untiring, the beauty and the grandeur of that sunset scene admiring. Well, that's beautiful.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, the book contains about 15 of her poems. These poems are just reprinted here, as David Deskins has done in his books. Let me do one more short reading. This last one I'll do is from the chapter on girls basketball. And if you just tuned in, I'm reading from a book called Education in Appalachia's Central Highlands. It was published in September of 1986. So it's been around a few years. But if you would like to get a copy of the book, you can order one from Writers Reading, Ernestine Collins, Box 44, Honaker, Kentucky. Okay, modern girls' sports. This is early history of girls' basketball. During the 1920s and 30s, some schools had girls' basketball teams as a regular part of their sports programs. Maytown High School, Maytown, Kentucky had a team. They were called the Yellow Jackets. This team was led by Harriet Allen during the 1933-34 season, and they won the regional championship, going on to the state tournament. Allen played for only a few minutes in the tournament, and the Yellow Jackets were defeated by the Ashland Kittens. Then the program of girls basketball was discontinued in 1934. So that's the reading from the section on girls basketball.
What other kind of things do you write about?
Well, I have a lot of interests, Ernestine. But some people know that I write about cooking. I have three things basically that I've written about. I've written about Appalachian history and Appalachian education. That's this book. I write about psychology and things related to psychology, and finally I write about food.
Okay, that's very interesting. I really appreciate you being on the show today, and hope that you'll come back and be with us again.
Well, thank you. I appreciate having me on the show. It's really been a pleasure.
Before we go off there, I'd like to read something that I've written today. This is a poem called I Am Falling. Help me, Father, I am falling. I am sinking fast. Here beneath this heavy burden, I shall not long last. Though the dawn is breaking, Father, I have yet to sleep. Hear the thunder rolling, Father. See the lightning sweep. Come and share my burden, Father. Bear me up, I pray. Calm the storm around and in me. Brighten up my way. Strong and steady keep me till I walk thy golden street. If I be found fallen, let it be at Jesus' feet.
That's really nice.
Thank
I
you.
like that.
Thank you. We'd like to thank today, first of all, Dr. Sohn, Dr. Mark F. Sohn, a professor at Pikeville College, for being on our show. And please come back again.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Also, we'd like to thank Dr. Don and WPRG Television, Harold, Kentucky. Until next week, may God bless you.